Fantastic. I think we're ready to get started with innovations and new business models and international remittances. It's also a good time for coffee break, apparently. We're going to go ahead and kick things off, as I know that people are tired after 2.5 days now of mobile conferences and mobile everything. So we're going to keep moving along. My name is Andrea Thomas. I work for Dahlberg Global Development Advisors. We're a strategy consulting firm that's focused exclusively on international development. And most recently, I've been working in this mobile and financial inclusion space, including with a series of reports on landscaping international remittances through branchless banking. And so I am particularly excited to be here today with this panel and speaking on this topic. Maybe to start off, I'll set a bit of the landscape and then I'll turn it over to the panel to introduce themselves. But I think this panel is particularly interesting because the potential for international remittances through mobile is so high. As I think many of you know, international remittances are greater than a $400 billion market, and they seem really primed for transfer through mobile. It's a win for the customers in the sense that it should be faster to deliver. It should enable them to enable a sort of easy transfer of yes, I received my money back to the sender. And it's also a win for business in the sense that mobile money has been looking for ways to put more funds into the wallet, and remittances could be a prime way to do that. And yet what we've seen through these 3 years of landscaping studies is that it hasn't quite taken off yet. And so in 2010, there were less than 10 mobile money deployments for international remittances. This year, we've counted over 30, with another 20 expected to go live in the next year. So quite a bit of interest in the space. And yet a number of challenges seem to keep things from taking off. Everything from customer awareness to regulations to interoperability issues. And so what I think we have here is, and I'm excited to say, we have a panel that can speak perfectly to all of these challenges and also give us the landscape for what things look like now and also the direction that in which things will be headed. So before I turn it over, I was asked to also mention that GSMA does have a support package for operators who are looking to do exactly this, which is move into international remittances. And so to contact David Goodstein for that. But with that, we'll kick it off with Greg, if you could introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Greg Marshall. I look after business development worldwide for Western Union Digital. Western Union Digital's remit is to grow the digital portion of Western Union's omni-channel business. So that includes both connecting to mobile operators, and we're in live service with 20 now worldwide, as well as sourcing and sending money to and from bank accounts, and expanding westernunion.com so that our customers can also transact with us online, all part of a strategy to allow people to work through us to send money anytime, anywhere, through any channel that they want.
Hi, good morning. My name is Jerry Ejikeme. I run Sochitel, which is an international airtime remittance company, platform. And we specialize or concentrate on B2B and B2C transactions in transferring airtime remittances across 230 networks. We started off with MTN, where we have a pretty strong relationship that has continued. And we're looking to evolve from there into offering our customer base mobile money offerings and utility offerings.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Eric Barbier. I'm the CEO of Transfer2. Transfer2 is a global airtime remittance network connected to over 300 mobile operators in over 100 countries around the world. We're having offices globally. Singapore is our head office. San Francisco, Dubai, and Barcelona are big offices of us. We're basically enabling immigrants to top up the prepaid cell phone of their relatives back home to send the gift of airtime, which is a small but very useful present internationally.
My name is Danny Aranda, and I'm the Director of Business Development at a company called Ripple Labs. We're the creators of Ripple, which is an open source protocol for doing transactions. And when you have this protocol living on servers that are distributed and decentralized, you get autonomous settlement within that network. So really one of the first networks that can process any kind of transaction across any kind of currency instantly and for free, and really provide the world a protocol that can wire together different kinds of financial institutions.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Marius Dano, and I work for Belgacom International Carrier Services. Now, Belgacom International Carrier Services is the 4th largest wholesale telecom carrier in the world, and most of you sitting in this room are actually customers of ours, even though you don't know it. The reason for this is because we actually provide roaming services, voice transit, SMS transit, and various other services. So because I assume most of you are from other countries, and are roaming in at the moment, you're actually using one of our networks. Now, we've got about 600 different telecom operators as our customers, and about 6 or 7 years ago, we realized that, we noticed that certain customers in certain regions were starting to deploy mobile money services in their domestic markets, and we realized that it will not take very long before these deployments will want to interoperate and connect on an international level to enable their subscribers to be able to send or receive money from abroad and so on. So we got busy starting to build a remittance hub called HomeSend, which has now been live for the last 4 years and enables remittances either towards cash-out agents, towards bank accounts, or towards mobile money deployments.
Fantastic. Well, Greg, Western Union is probably for many the first company that comes to mind when they think of international remittances. So maybe you could tell us a bit of what you've observed around the space of the growth in remittances through mobile, and maybe a bit of a provocative question. Are you really seeing new business models, or are we seeing maybe the same business models but merely through new channels?
Yeah. One thing that over all the years of working in mobile money that I've found is true is that each market is unique. It has unique business operating characteristics, a unique regulatory environment, social habits that vary literally from one country to the next. We think of Kenya and we think of Tanzania as neighbors, very similar countries and yet entirely different in the dynamics, especially the dynamics around banking and finance. So there's a lot of variation in business models that takes into account what is happening locally. I think from the composition of the panel here, we can see that there's a wide variety of ways of transferring value now, and a lot of different players looking to meet customer needs with a variety of different products and services. So we're focusing very much on money transfer, which is our core business, and which remains where such a large portion of financial flows are happening between individuals. But there are a variety of different ways of approaching this, and hopefully we'll be able to unpack, as we talk today, some of the different business models that are emerging.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Actually, I wonder, just to follow up on your point around the differences by country, what would you describe as maybe the recipe for success? So what's the country that it would be a best prime for growth of remittances through mobile? And maybe we can compare that to what that would look like, for example, for international top-ups instead.
Right. I think maybe we can get some audience participation here too. There's a number of different areas that we can unpack. One of them is interoperability. Daniel mentioned that earlier, particularly to get mobile money and all kinds of account systems interconnected so that people can move money quickly and easily. Another is the whole topic of financial inclusion and how governments and regulators can promote money transfer and remittance through enlightened and popular policies. I think there's a lot to be discussed around distribution and how to get money, products, services from consumers to businesses and back. And there's also some interesting discussion to be had around business models, operators and different types of institutions who are now getting into this space. So maybe some areas that we can talk about.
And this is a bit of the challenge in moderating this panel, is there's so much to discuss, and there is just the 1 hour, leaving time for questions as well. Actually, Marius, maybe you can give us some thoughts on what would you say the key challenges are to international remittances through mobile? So you've mentioned interoperability. Maybe you could tell us a bit more about that and maybe some of the others as well.
So I see two challenges in particular. One is critical mass. And obviously the other one is customer acceptance, and they do sort of go hand in hand. So when I'm talking, and I'm speaking specifically in the context of mobile money and termination to mobile wallets. So as we've seen on the mobile money tracker, there's 208 or so mobile money deployments. Live today, only less than 20% of those, or about 40 of those, actually are able to or do support international remittances. So that's one point in terms of critical mass. The other element of critical mass is that even though you do have these 40 or so mobile money deployments globally that do support international remittances, they tend to be a single operator in a particular market. Now, obviously, no market has only one single mobile operator except for perhaps North Korea and Cuba that I'm aware of. So even then, if you do, as a consumer, want to send to that market, you're kind of limited to a very small subset of the actual total addressable market that should or could receive remittances from abroad. I'm positive that will obviously change. Obviously, there are a number of hurdles that one has to go through. Regulation is one. Many of the providers of mobile money in these countries are today not able to receive remittances from abroad, but that is changing, I believe. So I think over time, given another 5 or 7 years, we're going to not have such a big issue with this critical mass question. Now, in terms of customer acceptance, that's more an issue on the sending side of the market. I think it's a question of behaviour, it's a question of education and kind of familiarity of this new way of sending money. Like I touched on in my presentation yesterday, out of the 500 billion or so that does flow around the world every year, the significant majority, and let's say it's about 85% or so, still is cash-to-cash based. And so people are very used to sending money that way, they trust it. And I think it's going to take time for people to move away from handling cash, not only at an international level, but also in many countries domestically. I mean, I live in Switzerland. It's amazing how prevalent cash still is. Most people still don't use credit cards in this country. So how can you expect people in emerging markets or migrants to kind of get involved into electronic payments? So I think there's a long way to go as well to gain customer acceptance in the sending markets, and there are various reasons why that's going relatively slow.
Well, this is a theme that I think will be continued through this discussion, which is the time it takes to really expand the landscape for and grow the acceptance of remittances through mobile. But this customer acceptance one is really fascinating because so much time and effort is spent, I think, on education on the unbanked side, so on the receiving side of international remittances. But the decision makers for remittances are really the senders. And so, Jerry, I wonder if you could share with us some of your experiences in marketing on the sending side.
Sure. I think it's very interesting whenever I go to these conferences, and a lot of the talk is about the unbanked in the receiving side. But people overlook that there's a lot of unbanked in the sending side. Hence, you talk about a cash, below the line cash economy going on. And I think it's very important to also understand that you know, what we've done is we've identified that you're talking about people. I know it's a general thing to say, but the sort of people are people who have left their home economies, economic migrants who support people back home. And this is across all numbers of geographical locations. So the question is, how do you use the mobile technology to allow them access in a way that they are comfortable with? We bring a differentiation in the market in that we actually reach down to the customer. I see a lot of technology, high-level discussions that doesn't really address who is the customer, what do they want, how do they want it, you know, how do they normally interact and do their business below the line. So to that end, we've used airtime remittance model to grow 2 million data of customers who are usually below the line, who are usually below the radar. And we've used it, I hear a lot about education and sensitization, but we've used it to show them how a transaction and a remittance goes from one side to the other real time across a platform, and it's airtime. We've used the distribution models and marketing models, whether it's Afghanistan, whether it's Nigeria, whether it's Poland, that they are comfortable with, that they have been doing. So I come from an MVNO background with Nomi Mobile, and when I left that company to set up this unique remittance, to invest into this unique remittance opportunity, we had an understanding of the distribution channels, of the customers who make phone calls all across the, should I say, developed economies. And with more and more migration, they're still having those habits. So what I see in the international remittance sector is the technology and the companies need to stoop down and get to the actual customer.
That's fascinating, especially what you describe about using the concept of an airtime top-up as a way to build trust for cash transfer. Eric, this is a perfect question for you. Maybe you could tell us more about how this works.
You talked about the customer education. One of the things we saw has been working very well is to use exactly the same mechanism that people were using in their country, because they're already used to exchange airtime to each other. They all call it differently, me to you, and so on. But in most emerging countries, provided that you're on the same network, you can send to each other airtime. And so people were used to that. So we replicate exactly the same user experience in developed markets where the migrants are. And so for them, it's exactly the same user experience that the one they were used to it. So the education is a bit less. You don't have to explain a new concept to them. You know, they were doing that in their home country. Now they can do it internationally.
So I don't want to give the impression, though, that it's as easy as it may seem from listening to you and describing, airtime top-ups to cash transfer, because this really does seem to be one of the key challenges, is education on the sending side. I don't know if Greg, you have other experiences with education and what's worked and what hasn't.
In terms of what's worked and what hasn't, some of the foregoing comments I think are really important. First is around critical mass. The mobile operators have critical mass of users in their own countries, in their own operations. Getting critical mass around mobile wallets, for example, is really key to getting money transfers moving internationally. So what we've discovered is that if there's a critical mass of users who are already active and involved in the service, then adding money transfer becomes something attractive and obvious for them to use. But the limited number of transactions that might be done in a month to transfer money internationally doesn't seem to be attracting people to come and get an account just for that purpose. So in a way, we can think of the airtime transfer as tapping into a kind of alternative value, alternative exchange of value in a similar way to money transfer, but tapping into that large base that's already using the phone and needing airtime top-up. And mobile wallets, subject to local KYC and other regulations around financial services, held to a somewhat more strict standard in most jurisdictions because it's a money product. So there's some differences in the approaches and of course different conditions in each market that set up the circumstances for the services.
Well then, I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit more about how the airtime top-ups work, and do you see them as being complementary to cash transfers or competitive in some ways?
Yeah, airtime top-up really solves the problem of sending below $20 worth of value back home. So that's really the sweet spot. What we've seen is the usage pattern are really a complement to money transfer. We work a lot with money transfer operators themselves, either for them to acquire new customers or for cross-selling. So basically, the guy would send $200 every other month, and he would be asked, why don't you send $10 to your cousin's cell phone? And the usage pattern is a bit different from money transfer. That's something which is interesting, is that the airtime is being sent to someone else than the person they're sending the money to. So that's another a way for people to support additional people. On average, we're seeing that senders send to around 2 to 3 different unique users, different unique senders, recipients, sorry, on the receiving end. And they're using it around 3 times a month, where, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've heard in most instances, people are sending money every other month. So that's the kind of different patterns we've seen.
Yeah. Well, what we've done is we're moving into the space of becoming an MMT sender, and we've acquired an MTO with small payments license, and it was necessary to do that as well because they have the experience directly in money transfer. But and we've concentrated on UK, Europe to Africa. Now, what we've also concentrated on when we signed our group agreement with MTN, it was the same time with Western Union, and we were tasked with looking at micro remittance. So we have a small payments license, so that when you talk about KYC, there is a minimum level that doesn't actually require in the UK upfront KYC. I've been on panels for fraud and regulation, but our system then kicks in to implement the checks, balance, gateways of the amounts and volumes that cooperate with the small payments license. So what we are looking at is the same customer that is sending airtime transactions back home to then offer them the ability to do small payments for unique emergency situations. Again, I take it back to it's a question of understanding the customer. These guys are working very hard in having come over to developed economies, and the money that they have is not how should I say? I see a lot of discussions being addressed to sophisticated online users, but we are targeting the below-the-line micro sender. But that £5 or $10 or €10 is actually worth quite a lot across the pond, across the sea, to to a developing economy recipient. So that's how we are. That's how we are targeting and strategizing our business to overlay on the 2 million customer database that we have and begin to allow them access to do micro payments and micro bill utility payments as well.
I think it's fascinating that you mentioned the that it's not just necessarily the unbanked on the receiving side, but also on the sending side within sort of immigrant communities. Because some of what we've observed from a channel perspective is some of the new deployments have online interfaces on the sending side, sort of assuming internet access, assuming facility with technology, and then allowing small to large amounts to be transferred. But there's probably a cutoff there, as I think you're describing, before it can even be sent. And so, we've spoken a good deal about the hurdles to using mobile cash transfers. So Daniel, maybe you can tell us about virtual currencies and what other hurdles there may be, and even thinking about very new models.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of virtual currencies, I think the typical view of things like Bitcoin is that they're kind of this exotic digital asset in terms of virtual currencies. But we regard, and many others believe, that the central innovation with something like Bitcoin was solving the double spend problem, which that online I can type out an email, I can send it out to 1 million people, and there would be no harm done. But you can't do the same with a dollar. And trying to do autonomous settlement to allow for the double spend problem to be solved was very difficult and didn't come around until Bitcoin came around. And so Bitcoin was the first time in history where two people could transact with each other and have trust in the system that their cash transfer or that their asset transfer actually occurred, and that it was legitimate. And that's the part that we've tried to focus on in a singular way with Ripple, is allowing for autonomous settlement across the network. But instead of being predicated on the Bitcoin protocol and using the Bitcoin currency, it's really for any kind of asset. So that could be US dollar transactions. It could also be any kind of value transaction, such as mobile top-ups going across the system. And then within the network, there can be liquidity providers. So someone who is willing to buy airtime from Kenya and sell off their liquidity and airtime in South Africa to allow for that transaction to occur in a peer-to-peer way.
So how do you see that sort of settling into the overall ecosystem for remittances through mobile?
Well, I think, a lot of the issues that just got brought up have been really interesting, and what I've seen over the past couple days here at the conference is a really interesting framework of thinking about how to make mobile money ubiquitous. And allow for when an asset ingresses into any kind of digital system, whether it's Ripple or it is a telecom's kind of internal digital ledger, you kind of have to think about the entire path of liquidity. And that could start all the way, I think people are thinking about it the right way. They want to start all the way from the salary level and go all the way down into kind of retail where people are actually spending their money. And also airtime encompasses a lot of that. I think I'm getting a little bit of feedback, sorry. So airtime being a large part of the consumer experience now in developing economies and where they're spending their money, it makes complete sense that you'll try to close the loop in terms of spending from digital asset to digital asset by allowing people to purchase across borders airtime.
So I think it's fascinating how much of this discussion is actually started to center around airtime top-ups. And I don't know if anybody can hear me now, but I'll keep going. How much of the discussion has centered on airtime top-ups and their part in this ecosystem of contributing to eventually adoption of cash transfers. But what about transfers of other goods and services? And so when we did this landscape, what we found was that there were some very new models that were looking to allow people on the sending side to directly pay off bills or directly purchase grocery gift cards for people on the receiving side, in that way to give sender some measure of control over how the funds are spent, which traditionally has not been the case for remittances. And I wonder if anybody here has had experience with some of those and how they sort of fit in, and whether is that a contributor, or is that sort of distracting from really investing in making cash transfers work?
I've got an example where we've been doing this with prepaid electricity in Indonesia. Prepaid electricity in Indonesia, so it's like your prepaid mobile phone. You know, when you run out of electricity, the light goes off. So we did exactly the same similar model with one of the mobile operator in Malaysia, DG. And directly from your phone, you would have someone to top up not a mobile phone, but to top up a prepaid counter electricity meter in Indonesia. You know, that goes into the, one of the problems that solves for immigrants is to make sure that the money they're sending is well spent. And mobile phones are a useful things, so they're happy to pay for that. Electricity is useful, they're happy to pay for that, and so on. So that's one of the trends we're seeing is being able for those guys to affect the money they're spending. And I think that's a big trend we're seeing in this industry.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, there's an exciting development where in Nigeria in particular, you know, they finally got their act around deregulating the utility and the electricity companies. So they unfortunately have about 18 different, they call it discos, distribution companies around the country. We are plugging into about 4, and it's the same model to allow Nigerians all over the world to have the option. Again, you bring it back to the customer, where they're at, what they would like to do, to have the option to send airtime, to pay an electricity bill through, we have about 400,000 electronic channels around the world that are linked to us. So just as they would to go pay a UK, US, and we're partnering with IDT in the US, as they would to go pay a UK, US utility bill, they can make a payment back home. And I think that's where you begin to say, layer on top of that, you can send cash, but you know, give them the opportunity to do different things through the platform and the technology, and which is also going to capture that missing, hidden channel of cash that we all know is 85% of the transfers going around.
Yeah, I think it's about trying to remove some steps, and again, trying to keep money in an electronic form where it can flow more cheaply. So rather than sending someone money electronically across borders, having them withdraw from the system, that cash withdrawal that they do is quite costly. And in fact, a lot of the cost in the remittance industry is at the edges, right? When people ingress into these electronic systems and when they egress. And so if you can close that loop by having people purchase something on the ingress that is immediately going to go towards what the final value is going to be, like a top-up or bill payments and those kinds of things, you really help kind of keep things within that system and really kind of bridge together money transfer and the final value where it's going to be spent by the beneficiary.
Did you have something else to add?
Yes, I wanted to add, I've even seen instances of prepaid digital or media content, specifically relating to India and Bollywood. Obviously, there's a huge Indian diaspora globally, in particular in the UK, and they prepay their, let's say, digital media content consumption out of the UK into India so that they can consume these Bollywood films on their iPhones, iPads, and so on and so forth. So yet another sort of application of prepaid, not airtime in this case, but prepaid content. That is becoming
If I could add one more thing there too. The remaining challenges then include interoperability once more, how to get systems to be able to talk to each other and enable this type of activity. And some of the cost that's at the edge is as a result of sometimes heavy integrations that need to be done in order to enable this kind of transactions. So there's there's quite a long way to go, but what we can tell is that this type of thing is beginning to really happen. We've been at this a long time. There have been a lot of people integrating. There's more willingness, I think, among various payers and payees to see the long-term value in creating electronic connections for digital payment and settlement. So we're at the beginning of a long path, a long trajectory to get sort of global total interoperability, but we all can see the vision and the work is ongoing.
Yeah,
That sounds like the holy grail, global total interoperability.
Shouldn't it be possible now?
People definitely see the path there, and you can see how it's going to be possible in the future. Although it's completely non-trivial to get there in terms of the ubiquity and the interoperability of all these systems together, especially on the mobile money side, which is super important because that is what's going to touch the end consumer, and likely small businesses and informal businesses as well. But again, you're starting to see it in certain markets, and people always refer to M-Pesa in Kenya. But Paul Macon, who I think is here in the audience now, hey Paul, one of the original developers of M-Pesa was telling me yesterday that there was a recent story of a government official in Kenya taking bribes via M-Pesa because they mistaked it for cash. And they thought it was kind of untraceable like cash, but it's a digital system. It was able to be traced, and they were caught. And that's kind of a small victory in terms of the ubiquity of mobile money.
Yes, and an interesting lesson on the need for education on both sides of the channel. I mean, maybe with just a couple of minutes left, and then we can open it up for questions. Maybe stepping back to the original intent for why I think remittances through mobile were so exciting, which is the idea of populating this mobile wallet and then providing the means for further transactions and increasing the adoption of mobile wallets generally. I mean, we've spoken a good deal about these new models. Are they a distraction from mobile wallets, or are they complementary to and sort of fostering trust in and use of mobile wallets? Thoughts?
I'll just think about mobile wallets in general and the way we look at them at Ripple. A mobile wallet is really a front end that engages with the consumer. And that kind of task and doing it very well it's an execution problem. It's about producing a really seamless, amazing consumer experience that articulates a value proposition very well and really simplifies a lot of complexity that's going to belie that kind of technology. And in order to get the best kind of execution, you really just have to have talented people working on these problems. And to get talented people to work on these problems, you have to provide access to tools and resources. And that's something that the internet has done very, very well for the information and communications industry. So you can think about examples like Instagram. Instagram was basically two kids in their 20s who had zero resources, like very little money to actually spend on the project. But they were able to go in and disrupt and impact a very large space, photo sharing, that a lot of very, very big companies were looking at, right? And that was because they had development resources below them. They had all kinds of open frameworks they could leverage. They had easy access to storage through Amazon Web Services. There were kind of all these tools and resources built around them, an entire ecosystem that can kind of, they could ride on top of and develop a kind of tertiary layer of an application on top that could become very, very valuable. And I think a situation like that is a litmus test for how sophisticated an ecosystem really is. So I think software, internet, and information has become very sophisticated, but finance has not. It still feels very balkanized. And the reason, I mean, we've been talking a lot about interoperability throughout the conference, and there aren't really kind of those low-level foundations in terms of establishing something that could look like a transactional internet or a transactional web. Those kind of low-level protocols and really just stacks of technology that will allow the next generation of entrepreneurs to build really, really great experiences. So that is a really fundamental problem that we're trying to tackle with Ripple, just building a low-level protocol for doing transactions and solving a problem of settlement in a way that a lot of people can trust while still having that protocol be neutral and completely open source and available to anybody.
Fantastic. We have a few minutes left. I mean, I always have more questions, but are there any in the audience? Yes.
John Owens from the Alliance for Financial Inclusion. I have a question, particularly for HomeSend and Western Union. We now see, and I remember working with Greg on this back in 2007, which was the first mobile wallet to mobile wallet route to cross-border remittance from Malaysia to the Philippines back 2007 between Maxis and Gcash. That didn't take off primarily because it wasn't the scale, but we do now see the scale in certain corridors like Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, where we could actually see true cross-border remittances via mobile money to mobile money transfers. And many of you work, your international remittances are primarily coming from the first world to developing countries. But where we've got these developing countries now that have these mobile wallets and a sizable percentage of the population with them, what do you see as the opportunity on that? My second question is, do you see the opportunity as well? Many of you are connected to multiple mobile wallets in the same country where interoperability or interconnectivity doesn't occur yet. You could actually provide that. Places like Kenya, the Philippines, in particular, where the operators won't directly connect, but you guys could make that happen because you are connected to both. So those are the two questions, one on cross-border and the other one within the countries.
John, yeah, thank you. For those of us who are old enough to remember back 12 or 15 years when there was no interconnection for SMS, and you had to carry around two phones, a smartphone and a globe phone in the Philippines in order to be able to text your friends, we saw the value, the network value that was created when there was interconnection between those systems. Surprisingly somewhat, in most environments where there are multiple mobile wallets, there still is no interconnection and ability to move between accounts. There are a variety of reasons for that, which include compliance and regulatory reasons, but clearly getting that together is going to be helpful because you're going to get more scale and a kind of network effect and people being more inclined to want to adopt accounts. So that, on the one hand, I think is something we certainly want to see. We're in a couple of places looking at being that hub, even domestically, to allow that, although the economics of that are somewhat challenging. When you get too many parties involved, as we know, trying to support a transaction, it gets hard to make it work for everybody, and especially for the end user. So, clearly we want to see more interoperability. We also think that we have a role to play in sorting out that problem.
So I completely agree with Greg that interoperability on a domestic level as well as interoperability on a regional level are going to help push the ecosystem a long way forward. The first step in that direction is readiness by the mobile operators to actually want to interoperate. And as far as I'm aware, there's only one exception to that, and I believe it's Indonesia, and it's only relatively recent that the operators there have decided to interoperate between their mobile wallets. I haven't seen any other instances of that. Hopefully that will be a good example going forward to the other regions or countries to show what is possible. Hopefully that is also successful, this interoperability in Indonesia. And secondly, on the regional level, you have areas in particular in continents like Africa, where I think regional interoperability, for example, across East Africa, Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, has a huge potential, and for regional remittances that will probably be far greater than remittances coming from the first world.
Fantastic. I think there may be time for one more question. Oh yes, sorry, everybody's pointing over there.
Yeah, I would like to hear something about the money laundering regulation, because we see that the industry has a lot of benefits for the money transfer, for international money transfers, but does the industry is facing today the laundry money regulation in some way?
Anybody? Money laundering?
He's talking about money laundering.
Yeah.
I think in the context of benefits, like development benefits, economic benefits.
I didn't get the question.
Yeah, sorry, we're trying to couldn't hear acoustically too well the question.
Oh, the international banking system has a laundry money regulation. So we see that the international transfers through the mobile money carriers, those they are taking in account this kind of situations, or
So to what
they're
extent?
just planning to do it, or how they are facing today the
So,
regulation?
so to what extent do international remittances consider international money laundering regulations in setting up a corridor, for example?
In this type of environment, say mobile wallet operator, in almost every jurisdiction that I know of, the regulators requiring same standard for mobile wallets as for banking in operator-led environments, and obviously in bank-led environments, it is the same. So very much so. In all of our 20 implementations, we do full transaction reporting, or the mobile operator does to the central banks, and regulation of anti-money laundering and anti-terrorist financing is across the board pretty much the same as it is for banking. And it looks like it's going to continue to be that way. There's more and more scrutiny, certainly in the United States, as a result of recent legislation, and that appears to be a worldwide trend as well.
I think to tackle the question purely from an interoperability perspective and allowing networks to connect, it's not just about knowing your customer, right, and having good KYC and AML procedures domestically, but it's also knowing your counterparty. So who you're going to interoperate with on the other side, because regulators domestically are going to want to know the entire path of your transaction, whether it's on your network or not. The point is it originated from your network, and you're responsible for who the end beneficiary is. It's a really tough problem to crack, but I think we're getting there. And there's a lot that technology can help with in terms of providing visibility, data, and transparency. And then there's also a lot of education to be done on the regulator side in terms of what new systems mean, and what they require, and what new protocols are really about.
On the other hand,
oh no, please.
I think certainly sort of the biometric technology that's making its way into mobile phones are probably going to solve a lot of that in terms of identity, KYC, and so on and so forth. So give it a few more years, and hopefully the let's say the viscosity of money flows will increase because of the fact that it will be a lot easier to identify individuals on both sides of the transaction.
You gave Apple your fingerprint.
You put your fingerprint in, off it goes, that's it.
I don't want to keep anybody from the break. I will say that if you have other money laundering questions or about regulations, I suspect Marius with the HomeSend Hub can probably answer all of them and more. But please join me in thanking this fantastic panel.
Thank you.